The Sahara Desert is well known throughout the world. And why not? It is the world's largest hot desert, sprawling across North Africa in a seemingly endless expanse of arid beauty, encompassing about 3.6 million square miles of the Earth. Only Antarctica and the Arctic, both cold deserts, surpass it in sheer size. The Sahara, however, stands alone in its heat and unforgiving nature, a region that has shaped civilizations and environments for thousands of years. The desert's name, Sahara, is derived from the Arabic word Sahara, meaning desert, a simple yet profound reflection of its defining characteristic. While the sands and dunes dominate much of the region's appearance, the Sahara is far more than a sea of sand. It stretches from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Red Sea in the east, and from the Mediterranean Sea in the north to the semi-arid savannas in the south. This massive desert occupies nearly 1/3 of the African continent, covering parts of Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Sudan, and more. And while it may seem that this desert can't get any bigger, again, it's 3.5 million square miles, the Sahara is in fact growing. But how does a desert grow, especially one so hot, so arid, and so seemingly devoid of life? Well, the answer is as complex as the landscape itself, and to foresee the future, we need to first dive into the past. The sheer size of the Sahara is mind-boggling. Spanning around 31% of the African continent, this desert is more than just vast. It's bright enough that its reflection of sunlight could theoretically be detected from space. If areas with annual precipitation below 10 inches were included, its size would increase to an incredible 4.2 million square miles. For hundreds of thousands of years, it's alternated between desert and savanna, following the Earth's axial precession, which influences the monsoon patterns in North Africa. This cyclical transformation adds to the desert's mystery, making it not only a historical artifact, but also a reminder of Earth's changing climate over millennia. Let's take a look at the history of the Sahara. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the region has shifted between periods of wet, fertile landscapes and arid, barren desert. Today, the Sahara is in a dry phase, but the forces that shaped it remain active, and the desert will one day transform again. The Sahara's climate is primarily driven by long-term changes in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, a 41,000-year cycle in which the tilt of the Earth shifts some 22 degrees. That plays a central role in altering the strength of the North African monsoon. When the tilt brings more sunlight to the region, the monsoon strengthens, leading to increased rainfall and the creation of what's known as the Green Sahara. During these periods, the desert blooms into a savanna rich with vegetation. And conversely, during weaker monsoon periods, the Sahara reverts to its arid state as seen today. This cycle of wet and dry phases has repeated over millennia, and the desert is expected to become green once again in about 15,000 years. So yeah, pretty much long after you're gone. During the last glacial period, the Sahara was even larger than it is today, extending farther south. As the glaciers retreated, rainfall increased from roughly 8,000 BCE to 6,000 BCE, bringing new life to the Sahara. Low pressure over the collapsing ice sheets may have drawn rain further into the desert. However, as the northern ice sheets disappeared, the northern Sahara began to dry out. The southern remained wetter for a time, sustained by the monsoon, but around 4200 BCE the monsoon retreated southwards, and the Sahara entered the dry period it remains in today. But there is a remnant of this wet past. It's Lake Chad, which was once part of a much larger inland sea known as Mega Chad. That's an awesome name. During the African humid period, this massive lake covered about 135,000 square miles, making it the largest of several Saharan paleo lakes. As the Sahara dried, Mega Chad shrank into the smaller Lake Chad that we know today. Then there's the Sahara pump theory, which describes how these wet and dry cycles influence not just the land, but the plants and animals of the region. When the Sahara is green, plant and animal life thrives, spreading across the landscape. As the region reverts to desert, those species are forced to migrate north to the Atlas Mountains and south into West Africa or east into the Nile Valley. This geographic isolation may have even driven evolutionary changes in some species, contributing to biodiversity through a process called holopatric speciation. There is also evidence to suggest that humans may have played a role in accelerating the Sahara's desertification. Despite the harsh environment, the desert has been home to various civilizations for thousands of years. Archaeological discoveries show that human occupation of the Sahara dates back to the end of the last glacial period, when the desert's edges were more hospitable. One of the earliest known cultures to inhabit this region was the Kiphian civilization, which thrived thousands of years ago in what is now the Central Sahara. The Kiphians left behind evidence of their existence through petroglyphs and ancient rock carvings that depict scenes of life in a much different landscape than today. Following the Kiphians, other cultures like the Tenarians and the Nubians made their mark on the Sahara, demonstrating the desert's long history of human settlement. Around 6000 BCE, the arrival of the Egyptian people signaled a significant shift in the region. During this time, the Sahara was lush and fertile, supporting agriculture and cattle herding. The Egyptians practiced both, benefiting from the Sahara's more hospitable environment, which was rich in plant and animal life. This fertile phase allowed for the development of complex societies that could sustain themselves in what is now one of the driest places on Earth. However, around 5,400 years ago, as the Earth's axis gradually shifted, the Sahara began its transformation into the desert we know now. Rainfall decreased, temperatures rose, and the once green Sahara slowly dried out, pushing civilizations toward its more fertile edges, such as in the Nile Valley. Over the centuries, the region saw waves of new inhabitants. Between 1200 and 800 BCE, the Phoenicians, known for their maritime trade, settled in parts of the desert. Later, the Greeks, Romans, and Berbers, among others, controlled sections of the Sahara. Each of these civilizations contributed to its rich and layered history, using the desert as a crossroads for trade, communication, and cultural exchange. The desert was not just a barrier, but also a passage for goods and ideas. The Garamantes, for example, created a sophisticated society in the Sahara, developing an early form of irrigation that allowed them to grow crops in the desert's climate. This ingenuity made them a powerful trading partner with the Roman Empire, demonstrating that life in the Sahara, though difficult, was far from impossible. In the later years, the Byzantines and Ottomans also left their mark on the region, with trade routes connecting the Sahara to the broader Mediterranean world. This history of occupation continued until the 19th century, when European powers began colonizing parts of the Sahara. Following the end of World War II, many of the states here gained independence, ending centuries of foreign control. So, all of this brings us to the central question of, is the Sahara Desert growing? The short answer is yes. Over the past century, the Sahara has expanded, with many studies showing that the desert has grown by an estimated 10% since 1920, particularly into the Sahel region to the south. When we think of something growing, we tend to picture fertile land, greenery, or life spreading outward. The growth of the Sahara, however, represents the opposite. The desert is expanding, pushing its dry, sandy borders further into previously semi-arid regions. This expansion is driven by a combination of natural climate cycles and human-induced factors, with researchers and experts observing that the desert's borders move most quickly during the hot, dry summer months, when conditions become even more inhospitable. The key to understanding the Sahara's expansion lies in water, or the lack of it. Water is essential for supporting plant life, which in turn helps stabilize soil and prevent desertification. In regions like the Sahel, the transition zone between the Sahara and the savanna, the presence of water allows vegetation to grow and act as a buffer against the encroaching desert. However, with decreasing rainfall, much of this buffer is being lost. A long-term study from the University of Maryland, published in 2018, shed light on the Sahara Desert's slow but steady expansion over the past century. By analyzing nearly 100 years of rainfall data, the researchers uncovered significant seasonal and long-term trends in the desert's growth. Their findings paint a detailed picture of how this vast desert has been encroaching further into the surrounding regions, particularly into the Sahel in the south. The study, which spanned 93 years, revealed that the most significant expansion of the Sahara occurred during the summer months. Over the duration of the study, the desert's average seasonal area increased by about 16% during this time of year. This increase was primarily attributed to the sharp reduction in rainfall across the Sahara, which allowed the desert to expand when conditions were already at their driest. But at the heart of this research is the idea that both human-caused climate change and natural climate cycles are contributing to the Sahara's expansion. According to the lead author Sumant Nigam, a professor of atmospheric and oceanic science at the University of Maryland, these two forces are likely working together to push the desert's boundaries. One natural factor, the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, plays a key role in shifting climate patterns across the region, with changes in ocean temperatures impacting rainfall levels across North Africa. The research also touches on the role of Hadley circulation. This is a large-scale atmospheric movement that affects climate patterns in the tropics and subtropics. Deserts like the Sahara typically form in the subtropics, where the Hadley circulation forces the dry air to descend. As the climate change widens the Hadley circulation, deserts are expected to push further north into more temperate regions. However, in the case of the Sahara, there's also a southward creep into the Sahel, suggesting that additional climate cycles, such as the AMO, are driving this expansion in ways that go beyond typical northward advance. The geographical pattern of the Sahara's growth is particularly revealing. While the northern boundary of the desert has expanded northward into the Mediterranean and subtropical regions, it's the southern boundary, the transition zone known as the aforementioned Sahel, that has seen the most dramatic changes. The Sahel is a semi-arid region that lies between the Sahara and the savannas of sub-Saharan Africa, and as the Sahara grows, the Sahel shrinks. This shrinking has significant ecological and human consequences, as the region's fragile grasslands and farming communities face the increasing challenges of desertification. So what's the human effect? Despite all of this, the desertification of the Sahara is a process that dates back even further than the recent climate trends. While the University of Maryland study highlights desert expansion in the last century, archaeologist David Wright has proposed that human influence on the Sahara's environment goes back much further. His research suggests that humans may have played a role in transforming what was once a lush green landscape into the vast desert we know today. This theory, which only adds to the many studies that point to natural factors like changes in the Earth's orbit, opens up a new perspective on how human activity can dramatically alter ecosystems. Wright's research draws on evidence from archaeological records to make his case. He notes that around 8,000 years ago, as those early pastoralist communities began to spread across the region, their introduction of livestock significantly altered the local ecology. By comparing the spread of these human populations with changes in vegetation, specifically in scrub vegetation, which is a massive marker of shifting ecosystems, towards more arid conditions, here's where the pattern begins to form. As human populations moved westward from the Nile River Valley, they left behind areas that gradually became drier. The removal of native vegetation by livestock increased the land's reflectivity, which then reduced the amount of sunlight absorbed by the Earth and altered atmospheric conditions. This shift weakened the monsoon systems that once brought rain to the region, exacerbating the drying process. This reduction in rainfall set off a self-reinforcing cycle. As vegetation disappeared, the land reflected even more sunlight, further weakening the monsoon rains and accelerating desertification. This feedback loop, driven by human-induced ecological changes, eventually could spread across the entire region, turning what was once a thriving ecosystem into the arid and semi-barren landscapes of the modern Sahara. While there's still much work to be done to fully understand the long-term impacts of these ancient practices, Wright's findings do challenge us to reconsider how human activity might have shaped the environment on a much larger scale than previously thought. The implications of this research is pretty significant. It suggests that human influence on climate and ecosystems isn't a recent phenomenon, but one that could stretch back thousands of years. The long history of environmental modification offers valuable lessons for understanding our current scale of human impact today. In particular, Wright's research does highlight the fragility of ecosystems in desert regions, with around 15% of the world's population currently living in desert or semi-desert areas. The importance of understanding how human activities affect these environments cannot be overstated. All of this just really enforces the fact that while we may have some of the answers, we probably will never truly have them all. But what about the Earth's axis? So we can't forget about how the Earth's axis will dictate when it rains, for how long, and even how hard. Geologist Jessica Tierney, an associate professor of geoscience at the University of Arizona, emphasizes that the transition of the Sahara from a green landscape to a desert is part of a natural cycle that would have occurred even in the absence of human intervention. As the Earth's orbit changes, it impacts the distribution of sunlight across the planet, leading to variations in climate and precipitation patterns. These changes cause the West African monsoon to weaken over time. The slow progression of these shifts mean that the landscape transitions gradually from a lush environment to a more arid one. However, there comes a tipping point when the degradation accelerates, resulting in a rapid transition from green to desert. The interaction of vegetation feedback and dust dynamics plays a crucial role in this process too. As rainfall decreases, plant life begins to diminish, which can lead to a feedback loop that exacerbates desertification. With less vegetation to hold soil in place, the land becomes more susceptible. This cycle of degradation can happen independently of human activities. However, it is clear that the presence of humans does complicate that natural process. During the last humid period, the Sahara was home to various hunter-gatherer communities that thrived in that verdant landscape. As the Earth's orbit shifted and rainfall diminished, these groups would have faced increasing challenges to their way of life. The need for food may have driven them to domesticate animals like cattle and goats, which further intensified the pressure on the environment. While it is possible that human actions such as overgrazing contributed to ecological degradation, Tierney suggests that the climate itself was a significant driving force in that transition. It is important to recognize that the cyclical nature of the Sahara's environment is not solely a product of human actions. Even if humans had never set foot in the region, the natural fluctuations in Earth's orbit would have still led to periods of greening and aridification, albeit perhaps on a smaller scale. Well, that begs the question, so what now? Now that we know the Sahara is expanding, we can ask ourselves what it all means. The ongoing expansion of the Sahara poses significant environmental and socioeconomic challenges, creating a ripple effect that could reshape the future of the region. The transition into desertification exacerbates drought conditions, making it increasingly difficult for communities to sustain their traditional ways of life. The loss of arable land directly translates into food insecurity and dwindling resources. Economically, the stability of the region is under threat as the expansion of the desert disrupts local livelihoods. With traditional methods of food production becoming untenable, rural populations may flock to urban areas in search of opportunities. This migration can lead to overpopulation in cities, further straining limited resources and infrastructure. Moreover, the ecological implications of the Sahara's growth extend beyond human concerns. The loss of biodiversity is a pressing issue, as habitats for various plant and animal species diminish. This decline in biodiversity has cascading effects, influencing soil quality, water availability, and overall ecosystem health. The degradation of these natural systems can compromise the very foundation of human survival, making it essential to prioritize conservation efforts. So let's talk about the green period. The Sahara was once a lush and green landscape during what is referred to as the green phase. This period, which happened approximately 6,000 years ago, was marked by significant rainfall and a thriving ecosystem that supported a variety of plants and animals. Evidence of this verdant past has emerged from the work of researchers such as Robert Cordy from Texas A&M University and William Booz from Yale University, who have delved into the precipitation patterns of the Holocene era. During this green phase, the Sahara was characterized by a landscape dotted with lakes, rivers, and thriving vegetation, creating an environment conducive to human habitation and the development of pastoral societies. This transformation can be traced back to shifts in the Earth's orbit and the position of the intertropical convergence zone. This is a significant area of tropical rainfall. As Cordy explains, the movements of the ITCZ linked to the Hadley circulation played a role in determining rainfall patterns, allowing the Sahara to flourish. By utilizing computer models and analyzing historical data, Cordy and Booz have revealed how the ITCZ migrated significantly northward during the Holocene, leading to increased rainfall in regions that are now arid. Their findings indicate that while changes in Earth's orbit contributed to that shift, they were not solely responsible for the heavy rains that fell on the Sahara. So the question arises, could the Sahara return to its once green state? Well, while the climate is inherently variable and can fluctuate over thousands of years, there are challenges to restoring these conditions in the Sahara. The current climate change trends are characterized by rising temperatures and altered precipitation patterns, which complicate the potential for a return to a lush Sahara. Even if natural processes led to increased rainfall, the ecological and human impacts of current land use may hinder the region's ability to support an ecosystem similar to what existed. Additionally, Cordy emphasizes the need for a deeper understanding of how rainfall patterns could shift in response to modern climate forces, such as El Niño and La Niña events. These insights could be instrumental in predicting future weather patterns and managing the risks associated with climate variability in this region. So what's the Green Wall? Well, in response to all these regional challenges, one of the most ambitious initiatives ever conceived was launched, the Great Green Wall. The original vision for the Green Wall was straightforward: plant a massive stretch of trees 10 miles wide and 4,300 miles long across the southern border of the Sahara from Senegal to Djibouti. The idea was to create a natural barrier to stop desertification and restore the land. However, while well-intentioned, this approach faced a myriad of practical issues. With little funding, no scientific basis for success, and a lack of local involvement, the project initially faltered. The trees planted across the Sahel did not survive, with up to 80% of them dying, and the desert continued to encroach. Scientists on the ground pointed out that planting a forest on the edge of the desert wasn't the answer. Instead, they proposed a more practical approach based on indigenous land use practices that were already proving effective. Rather than attempting to impose an artificial solution, farmers had to discover ways to re-green the land using simple, sustainable techniques like water harvesting and protecting naturally occurring trees. This shift in strategy transformed the Great Green Wall from a literal wall of trees into what many call a mosaic of sustainable land practices. The focus is on empowering farmers to manage their land in ways that promote growth, improve soil fertility, and increase water retention, all crucial for reversing the effects of desertification. The success of these methods became quickly visible. Communities that were once struggling to survive are now seeing their land coming back to life. Trees that had disappeared due to overuse are re-emerging, soil quality is improving, and the region's resilience to drought is increasing. The Great Green Wall, in this new form, is not just a fight against desertification, it's become a symbol of hope for the region, plagued by climate change, food insecurity, and economic hardship. The lessons from both the past and the present are clear. While natural cycles will continue to influence Sahara's climate, human actions can accelerate or mitigate these changes. The Great Green Wall is a powerful example of how working with the land, rather than against it, can help restore ecosystems. If successful, this initiative could become a blueprint for combating desertification not only in Africa, but across the world. So far, the Great Green Wall initiative has created 335,000 jobs in rural areas, and the value of forest products and fruits generated has exceeded 90 million. In addition to restoring the land, the Great Green Wall aims to create a total of 10 million jobs, providing a vital source of income for communities. The cost of achieving this wall's full potential remains significant. With an estimated total budget of $33 billion, a project must navigate a range of logistical challenges. Restoring degraded land in arid regions is no easy feat, especially when factoring the cost of maintaining newly planted vegetation. As noted by scientists working on the ground, it's very easy to plant a tree, but it's not easy to grow one. Trees must be regularly watered and protected from livestock, and these tasks can be expensive in regions where water and infrastructure is limited. Despite the challenges, though, the long-term implications of the Great Green Wall are immense. If successful, this initiative will not only restore the ecological balance of the Sahel, but also provide a blueprint for combating desertification and climate change across the world. It also has the potential to slow the loss of biodiversity, with restored ecosystems offering habitats for species that are currently under threat from the desert's expansion. Ultimately, the Great Green Wall is more than just about halting the advance of the Sahara Desert. It's about providing a sustainable future for the people of the Sahel, protecting ecosystems, and creating new economic opportunities where few currently exist. Let's talk about the plants and animals here. Despite the harsh environment, the Sahara is home to a surprisingly resilient variety of flora and fauna. As the desert expands and conditions become increasingly inhospitable due to desertification, the plant and animal life of the Sahara faces significant challenges. Yet many species have evolved extraordinary adaptations that allow them to survive in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The vegetation of the Sahara is defined by its ability to withstand long periods of drought, extreme heat, and limited water availability. Scattered across the desert are hardy grasses, shrubs, and trees, most of which are found in highland regions, oases, and along the dry riverbeds. These plants have evolved various strategies to survive in these conditions, including deep root systems to access underground water, salt tolerance, and rapid reproductive cycles that take advantage of even brief rains. For example, many herbaceous plants in the Sahara are ephemerals, which mean they can germinate within just a few days after a rainstorm and complete their entire life cycle in less than 2 weeks. Other plants, such as halophytes, are found in saline depressions. They've developed the ability to thrive in salty soils, while species like the dome palm and acacia trees can store water for long periods, enabling them to survive the relentless heat. The Sahara's animals are equally remarkable in their ability to endure such extreme conditions. Mammals like the desert hedgehog, jerboa, and gerbil are adapted to nocturnal lifestyles, avoiding the punishing heat of the day by coming out at night. Larger animals such as the Barbary sheep, scimitar-horned oryx, and Dorcas gazelle are highly mobile, allowing them to cover vast distances in search of food and water. These species, however, are becoming increasingly threatened by habitat destruction, hunting, and the expansion of human settlements. Historically, the Sahara supported even larger animals, including the North African elephants, lions, and addax antelope, but many of these species have been hunted to extinction or driven out of their habitats. While the last North African elephant disappeared during the Roman periods, lions were still present in the northern desert margins as late as 19th century. Today, only a few populations of once plentiful species remain in these remote regions like the Tibesti Mountains, where pygmy crocodiles and cobras may still survive in isolated drainage basins. Bird life, though, in the Sahara is surprisingly diverse, with over 300 species, including both resident and migratory birds. Raptors such as eagles and falcons soar over the desert, while ostriches, guinea fowl, and buzzards inhabit the more vegetated regions. The coastal zones too and remaining interior waterways provide vital stopover points for these migratory birds, making the Sahara an important, though sparse, ecosystem for avian life. The Sahara and its southern border, the Sahel, are creeping further southward, resulting in the loss of valuable ecosystems and arable land. This has grave implications not only for the plants and animals that live in the region, but also for the 135 million people who rely on these lands for their livelihoods. This will make it increasingly difficult for plants to survive, especially those that rely on rain events to reproduce. Unfortunately, many species have nowhere else to go, and the growing human presence in the region only adds to the pressure on these already stressed systems. But recent research would suggest that installing large-scale solar and wind farms in this region could do more than just provide clean energy. It could help reverse the effects of desertification, bringing rainfall, vegetation, and life back to the desert. This idea, though still theoretical, has potential to transform not only the Sahara itself, but also the surrounding regions, offering both ecological and economic benefits. Solar panels in the Sahara seem like a no-brainer. Large-scale solar farms in the Sahara could generate immense amounts of clean energy, far more than current global demand. In fact, a 2018 study suggested that if wind and solar farms covered over 3.4 million square miles of the desert, they could generate around 79 terawatts of power annually from solar alone. To put this into perspective, that amount of energy could power billions of light bulbs simultaneously and provide more energy than the world currently uses. But beyond just producing clean energy, solar panels in the Sahara could have far-reaching, positive environmental effects. According to some simulations, the installation of a massive solar farm could increase the local rainfall and promote the growth of vegetation. Solar panels darken the ground beneath them, creating rougher land surfaces that absorb more heat, which in turn alters air circulation patterns. These changes could lead to increased humidity and eventually rainfall. The study found that this increased precipitation could boost vegetation growth in the region by as much as 20%. This is significant in the southern border of the Sahara, which currently receives very little rainfall. The potential for increased rainfall is one of the most exciting prospects of this proposal. Deserts, by definition, receive less than 10 inches of rain annually, but the installation of wind and solar could push these regions above that threshold. In fact, the Sahel could see an increase of up to 20 inches of rain each year, transforming it into an area capable of supporting agriculture and abundant plant life. That additional rainfall would not be confined to the Sahel. Even areas directly within the Sahara could see a notable increase, with precipitation potentially doubling around solar and wind farms. While these changes might seem modest, an average of 0.01 inches of rain per day, they would be significant enough to alter the landscape, allowing grasses, shrubs, and trees to take root and spread. As the desert recedes, these newly greened areas could also act as a buffer against the advancing Sahara, helping to halt its expansion. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.